was she getting to manage the archive. And it's been wonderful. Thank you for a smooth ride.
Available too. So
yeah. Well, we're going to nail his foot to the floor. So you can't do it. Right. You left your seat. You left his seat. Never mind. So we're together again for number 3 in the series. In the previous 2 lectures, we talked about how one musical theater form sort of emerges out of the other in constantly changing shapes and colors, like in a kaleidoscope, right? It's sort of like watching children grow up. You just never know what's going to happen next, right? And where they will end up. It's just a great adventure. And this is a great adventure. I've really enjoyed researching and presenting these 3 lectures. The last lecture ended with West Side Story in 1957. Yeah, it was that long ago. And the 2 traditional musicals that followed it in 1959, Gypsy and The Sound of Music. So just recall that, particularly The Sound of Music, the musical language, and the storyline, as opposed to West Side Story. What a difference, right? So West Side Story still stands out in its own time as being a revolutionary music. The third period, this is the third period, of course, and it's redolent in a different way. Its richness comes from its great variety. And from a musical standpoint, you have the quasi-operas, like Sweeney Todd, maybe Phantom of the Opera, maybe Les Miserables. And you have musicals actually based on opera, like Rent and Aida. And you have musicals based on famous books or plays, like Phantom, Les Miserables, Ragtime, Don Quixote, and Chicago. Then you have issue-driven musicals, like Hair. Les Miserables could be considered issue-driven, cabaret. And then you have concept musicals. Company, Assassins, Follies, a chorus line. So you can see that Stephen Sondheim sort of started the concept musical. That's a musical that doesn't have a driving plot. It's more just exploring a time or an atmosphere or an idea, rather than having a plot and villains and sub-characters and that sort of thing. But changes are coming. So let me begin by reading a quotation from John Bush Jones' estimable book called Our Musicals, Ourselves. There's some very interesting books, and the handouts from the last 2 lectures, I gave you a bibliography. And I tell you, they're worth reading. And these people have explored all of the details of all of the musicals. They're all listed. And really, it's very enlightening. So that was part of the joy of researching these lectures. So quoting Mr. Jones, he says, now you're going to tell me when this happened, you probably remember, Mark Rudd and his friends, protesting the university's association with defense projects, among other things, noisily and effectively brought Columbia University to a standstill by taking over the president's office and 5 university buildings and holding a dean hostage. What was that?
That's spring. This past spring.
Okay, but it's further back than you think. It sounds a little bit like they're protesting what's going on in the Middle East or something. So they took over. Right. Okay. It was 1967, and it was the uproar surrounding a certain musical. Remember which one? Hair! You got it. So, I mean, student protests are nothing new. Hair was born out of the hippie movement of the 1960s and broke all social and theatrical norms. You probably remember that. Anybody see Hair?
Yeah.
Hey, wow. Good for you. I was living abroad then. I'm sure it came, but I was busy in another genre of music theater called opera. Its storyline included drugs, nudity, sex, desecration of the flag, and rejection of what the authors saw as a society denying individualism, glorifying money and war, and tolerating discrimination. So this was hot stuff back in 1967. Hot stuff. Musically, only one song made it into the public memory, and that was
Aquarius.
Age of Aquarius is the one I remember. Yeah. But I'm sure there are others as well. Sorry. The year 1975 brought two important musicals to Broadway: A Chorus Line by Marvin Hamlisch and Edward Cleveland, and Chicago by John Kander and Fred Ebb. John Kander was a native of Kansas, and he was something of a prodigy whose first Broadway composition job came out of connections. Lots of things on Broadway happen because of connections. Connections he made while substituting for a pianist in the original production of West Side Story. Fred Ebb came from New York's Lower East Side. Kander attended Oberlin College Conservatory, and I only mention that because that's where I went, right? But it's also a good school. He attended Oberlin, and Ebb went to New York University. They both ended up doing graduate degrees at Columbia. Their first job together was in a Harold Prince production called Flora the Red Menace. Take you back? Yeah. Right. It did not actually make the top 100. Never mind. This was followed by another Harold Prince production, Cabaret, which is in the top leading musicals. Cabaret premiered in 1966. So 6 years after I got out of college. Cabaret swirls around life in Berlin before the Nazis take over in 1933. The director, Bob Fosse, intentionally drew a parallel to the civil rights movement that was going on in America at the same time. Cabaret was followed by Chicago, which debuted in 1975. The original title is interesting. It was called Chicago, a musical vaudeville, probably because there were a lot of other shows that were called Chicago. Here, too, the authors were drawing a line between the vaudeville atmosphere of Berlin in the 1930s and the 20s, with its sleazy characters and casual sexual relationships, and Chicago of the 1920s with its infamous gangsters. The song All That Jazz has become iconic. It's fun. And the storyline follows the fortunes of a showgirl, Roxy Hart, who has murdered her lover and then convinces her husband that the man was simply a burglar. The following duet, that we're now going to watch, sung by Renee Zellweger and Richard Gere, takes place when Roxy's lawyer, played by Gere, arranges a press conference to promote a newly concocted version of how the alleged burglar actually died. So, Brian, if you will. He will. Oh, he will. Can't do two things at once.
Conference ride. Notice how his mouth never moves. Almost.
Where'd you come from?
Mississippi,
And your parents?
very wealthy,
Where are they now?
6 feet under, but she was granted one more star. The canon of the Sacred Heart. me
With a pistol,
from my bureau.
did you fight him?
Like a tiger, he had strength that she had none. And yet we both reached for the gun. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, both, oh yes, both, oh yes, both reach for my gun, my gun, my gun, my gun. Oh yes, both reach for the gun, for my gun.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both reach for the gun, the gun, the gun, the gun. Oh yes, they both reach for the gun, for my gun.
Understandable, understandable. Yes, it's perfectly understandable. Comprehensible, comprehensible. Not a bit reprehensible. It's so defensible.
How you feeling?
Very frightened.
Are you sorry? Are you kidding?
What's your statement?
All I'd say is, don't mind choo-choo jump the track. I give my life to bring it back. Stay away from jazz and liquor. And the men who play for fun. That's the thought that came upon me when we both reached for the gun.
Understandable, understandable.
Yes, it's perfectly understandable. Comprehensible, comprehensible. Not a bit reprehensible.
It's so defensible.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both reach for
Let me hear it.
the gun, the gun, the gun. Oh yes, they both reach for the gun, for the gun. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both reach for
Oh,
the
yeah.
gun, the gun, the gun, the gun. Oh yes, they both reach for the gun, for the gun.
Got it?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both reach for the gun, the gun, the gun, the gun. Oh yes, they both reach for the gun, for the gun. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both, oh yes, they both reach for the gun, 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 the gun.
Both reach for the
Right, fun. Genius, genius of the director. Wow. So, Stephen Sondheim. We first met him in the last lecture as the lyricist for West Side Story, but that was just the beginning. In the 1970s, he wrote Company, Follies, A Little Night Music, and Sweeney Todd. And then in the 1980s, we have Merrily We Roll Along, Sunday in the Park with George, and Into the Woods. Sondheim won 5 Tony Awards for the Best Original Score and a Pulitzer Prize for Sundays in the Park with George. In November of 2015, President Obama awarded Sondheim the Medal of Freedom, crediting him with reinventing the American musical. Sondheim had some important mentors on his way to the top. There was the composer Milton Babbitt, as well as the legendary Oscar Hammerstein II. That latter affiliation would prove pivotal in his development. He bounced ideas off of Oscar, he checked things, Oscar gave him ideas, so it's good to have somebody in the business to give you feedback when you're starting out, particularly. His style evolved into a subtle combination of seriousness mixed with wry humor and a sense of fun. His insightful lyrics frequently highlight the human condition with gentle satire. The music is transparent when the feelings are tender, and sturdy when the emotional context is larger. So now we're going to listen to a very special performance of Send in the Clowns, sung by Dame Judi Dench at the BBC Proms. Yeah, only one person happy back there. It really is quite remarkable. So Brian, if you don't mind.
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, you in midair. Send in the clouds. Isn't it bliss? Don't you approve? One who keeps tearing around, one who can't move. Where are the clouds? Send in the clouds. Just when I'd stopped opening doors, finally knowing the one that I wanted was yours, making my entrance again with my usual flair, sure of my lines. No one is there. Don't you love fast? My fault, I fear. I thought that you'd want what I want. Sorry, my dear. And where are the clowns? There ought to be clowns. Don't bother. They're here. Isn't it rich? Isn't it queer? Losing my time in this late in my career. Where are the clouds? There ought to be clouds. Well, maybe next year.
What interests me here is that with very limited means, he has created a profound effect. And the solo, I think it's a clarinet that starts it out and plays also in the middle and the end. That is so haunting and desolate and lonesome. So with very, very small means, he created something just overwhelming. Yeah, right? Not the dry eye. Okay. Some of you may know, I'm sure Rick does, where's Rick? Oh, maybe. Oh, there he is. The Rosenkavalier, first act, when the aging Marshal, she's not really aging, she's maybe 30. She says goodbye to her young lover, and then she sings this monologue. And it just reminds me of that, very strongly. So there's always a connection between musicals and art. So now we're going to experience a little more robust, maybe, I don't know what you can call it upbeat, but it's sort of quasi-operatic Stephen Sondheim. And I'm going to quote the author Mark Grant, who has written a very interesting book called The Rise and Fall of the Broadway Musical. That's worth reading. So he commends Sondheim for resisting the temptation to use rock music in his compositions, which was certainly the sort of the coming trend. But he faults him for not orchestrating his own music and for overutilizing what they call vamps. And vamps in music is a kind of, in popular music anyway, it's not in classical music, but in popular music is a kind of stasis, if I can use that word. Melodically, harmonically, everything sort of stands still and you sort of just repeat the same musical gesture over and over again until the melody comes back or the big tune comes in. A little bit like recitative precedes an aria in opera. So our next excerpt is from Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. The barber has recently returned to his old haunts in London from exile abroad. He vows to depopulate the city of London in revenge for the cruelty of a depraved judge who raped his wife, causing her to commit suicide, abducted his daughter, and then exiled Todd to Australia. The problem with revenge is, what do you do with all the bodies? So this macabre duet presents a possible solution. It's from the end of Act 1. Todd's landlady, Mrs. Lovett, has a bright idea to dispose of the barber's customers by baking them into her meat pies. She is certain, for example, that lawyers and priests taste differently. Okay? Sweeney Todd, a little priest.
This needs a lift. Debts to be erased. Think of it as thrift, as a gift, if you get my drift. No? Seems an awful waste. I mean, with the price of meat, what it is, when you get it, if you get it. Oh, good you got it. Take, for instance, Mrs. Mooney and her pie shop. Business never better, using only pussy cats and toast. Now a pussy's good for maybe 6 or 7 at the most. And I'm sure they can't compare as far as taste.
Mrs. Lover, what a charming notion.
Well,
Eminently
it does
practical
seem
and yet
hard
appropriate as always. Mrs. Lover, how are
It's an idea.
I'll never know.
Think about it. Lots of old gentlemen will soon be coming
It's
for
also
a shave.
one
What's
to more. How choice, how rare. What's the sound of the world out there?
What, Mr. Todd, what, Mr. Todd, what is that sound?
Those crunching noises pervading the air.
Yes, Mr. Todd, yes, Mr. Todd, yes, all around.
dear. And who are we to deny it? These are desperate times, Mrs. Lovett. Desperate measures are called for.
The oven? Hot out of the oven.
What is that?
It's Proust. Avalon Proust.
Is it any good?
Sir, it's too good, at least. Then again, they don't commit sins of the flesh, so it's pretty fresh.
Awful lot of fat.
Only where it's sat.
Haven't you got poet or something like that?
No, you see, the trouble with poet is how do you know it's deceased? Try the priest.
It was heavenly. Not as hearty as bishop, perhaps, but then not as bland as curate.
It's good for business too, because it always leaves you wanting more. Trouble is, we only get it on Sundays. Lawyers rather nice.
If it's for a price.
Order something else though to follow, since no one should swallow it twice.
Anything that's lean.
Well then, if you're British and loyal, you might enjoy Royal Marine. Anyway, it's clean, though of course it tastes of wherever it's been.
Is that squire on the fire?
Mercy no sir, look closer, you'll notice it's grosser.
Looks thick, more like thicker.
No, it has to be grosser, it's green.
The history of the world, my love.
Save a lot of graves, do a lot of relatives' favours.
Is those below serving those up above?
Everybody shaves and there should be plenty of flavours.
How gratifying for once to know that those above will serve those down below.
Oh, now, what here? I've got Tinker,
Something pinker,
Taylor,
something paler,
Potter,
something hotter,
Butler,
something subtler.
Locksmith. Lovely bit of clock.
Maybe for a lark.
Then again a sweep if you want it cheap and you like it dark. Try the financier. Peak of his career.
That looks pretty rank.
Well, he drank, it's a bank cashier. Never really sold. Maybe it was old.
Have you any beetle?
Next week, so I'm told. Beetle isn't bad till you smell it and notice how well it's been greased. Stick to priest. Now this might be a little bit stringy, but then again, it is fiddle player.
That's not fiddle player. That is piccolo player.
How can you tell?
It is piping hot.
Well then, blow on it first.
The history of the world, my sweet.
Oh, Mr. Todd, ooh, Mr. Todd, what does it tell?
It's who gets eaten and who gets to eat.
And Mr. Todd too, Mr. Todd, who gets to sell?
But fortunately, it's all so clear that everybody goes down where we've been.
Oh, since Marine doesn't appeal to you, how about Rear Admiral?
Oh, it's too salty. I prefer general.
With or without his privates? With is extra.
What is that?
It's fop, finest in the shop. Or we have some shepherd's pie peppered with actual shepherd on top. And I've just begun. There's the politician so oily, it's served with a doily, not one.
Put it on a bun. Well, you never know if it's going to run.
Try the fryer, fry this dryer.
Now the clergy is really too coarse and too mealy.
Then actor, that's compactor.
And always arrives overdone. I'll come again when you have judge on the menu.
Wait, true, we don't have judge yet, but there's there's something else you might fancy even better.
What is that?
Executioner.
A charity for the world, my pet.
Yes, yes, I know, my lord.
We'll take the customers that we can get.
High born and low, my lord.
We won't discriminate great from small. No, we'll serve anyone.
We'll serve anyone
And to anyone at all.
And you notice they went down. There was a, what do they call these things? Platforms, went down underneath the stage at the end, the only direction they could go. Right. Okay. And there was a wonderful example of vamping in that. Did you hear? Don't pump. It just, the music just sort of stood still and they sort of chanted on top of it. And you're waiting for this music to go on to something harmonic or melodic. Oh God, how long are they going to do that? So that's what the author was talking about when he was criticizing Sondheim for using too much vamping. Right. Okay. Turn the page. Sweeney Todd is often described as a quasi-opera. For a couple of reasons. It's through composed, although there is talking, as you can hear, intermittently. But although there are a few expansive vocal moments, the parlando passages, and with parlando I mean that kind of speaking on, above the music, were written more for the Broadway type voice. In chest voice, we talked about the chest voice process in the last lecture. Written more for that kind of voice than the classical voice, although opera singers have done this show, and it's been done in opera houses. It belongs, obviously, to a genre called horror musicals. Right, how did you know? Where the socially unthinkable and gruesome plot lines are a part of the allure. So the audiences obviously found that interesting, found it, worth watching. So there was something called a Rocky Horror. I had dinner with a guy the other night, and he just kept talking about that. It was just the most wonderful show. And I said, I haven't seen it. I'm so sorry. And the Phantom of the Opera. Andrew Lloyd Webber has some of that horror element into it. And Chicago, the plot is not exactly uplifting. Apparently audiences find that interesting. They say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, in which case American musicals are very flattered indeed. First, we have our British friends, who've done us proud with their imitations. Andrew Lloyd Webber, the foremost, came from a musical family. His career began when he was barely 20 years old with a pop cantata, and you know it, Joseph. You got it. Which he wrote in 1968, together with the lyricist Tim Rice. This was followed in succession by Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, and Cats. Cats was, of course, to the poems of T.S. Eliot, who was an American, although he became very British. 2 years after Starlight Express, I remember going, in those days I went to Europe almost every year in the summertime. And I stayed at the Sloan Club, which was not far from Victoria Station. And in that area around Victoria, there was a theater. And every year it was still playing Starlight Express. What is this? I should have gone in, I didn't see it. Apparently it was, did anybody see Starlight Express? Yeah. Oh, Philly, you saw that. So I'm told it was about trains, but the performers were all on roller skates. Well, that makes sense. But opera started doing that too. Also there on Sloane Square, there's a theater called the Royal Court Theater, and they were doing a Cavalli opera one year. And Cavalli is a Baroque composer, so it's kind of different music from what we used to hear. And I did go to that. And the performers were all on roller skates. You know, one guy gets an idea and they pass it around. Okay, so after all of these things and Starlight Express, we get the Phantom of the Opera in 1986. And Phantom turned out to be a phenomenon, which you know, outrunning all of its predecessors and successors with nearly 14,000 performances on Broadway alone. 14,000. Phantom is based on a famous novel by Gaston Leroux. And it itself is not an opera, but of course it takes place above and below the stage in an opera house. And it utilizes faux operas, I call them, in the storyline, mimicking the real operas of Aida, Figaro, and Don Giovanni. So we're going to listen to the opening, I guess it's the opening scene, in Phantom of the Opera, for just a few minutes. It's 3 minutes long, and then it will be quiz time. Quiz time, yeah. That's fun. You guys know a lot, so I'm going to ask you a question.
In sleep he sang to me, in dreams
So quiz time. The success on Broadway seems to be measured in the number of performances that a certain show can chalk up, right? And using that measuring stick, which musical, now I've already given away the first place, right? So with 14,000 performances. Okay, so what do you think are the top 5? Who would be the second in number of performances? Okay, well, I mean, you'll be surprised. 9. 9 shows. Chicago is the second most popular with about 11,000 performances. The Lion King, somebody mentioned The Lion King, right? Also at 10,600. Wicked, which came later, right? 8,000 something. And Cats, right? Les Miserables, which was undoubtedly popular, was about 6,680 performances. And this is a fairly up-to-date statistic. It comes from Playbill, and so it's fairly reliable, and it's current. It was, the date was early November on these statistics. And I thought that was interesting. Hamilton didn't quite even make it into the top 10. Not yet. Well, yeah, that's true. It's young. It's still happening. Okay, to close today, we're going to consider 2 more recent musicals, Hamilton and Les Miserables. Let's look first at what they have in common. They have both been called mega musicals, running for thousands of performances. And their stories are both rooted in revolution, right? About the same time, around the turn of the 18th to 19th centuries. But they could not be more different. Hamilton's subject is a quasi-biographical musical of a founding father, as you know. And Les Mis is based on a famous novel by Victor Hugo. Les Mis was also conceived and brought to life by a team, Schoenberg and Bouville. Musically, they also diverge. The hip-hop style of music which dominates Hamilton consistently, almost consistently throughout, is really the main impression. And that, the hip-hop, you know hip-hop? Do we know what it is? Yeah, sort of like rap. It's rhyming words chanted to a strong rhythmic beat. So there may be a musical component in it, but it's not absolutely necessary. But I've thought a lot about this, and I've sort of come up with a reason why rap and hip-hop are so popular. I'll tell you privately. No, I really have thought about this, because I'm a melody and harmony person. The show itself, Hamilton, is brilliantly conceived and implemented. We saw it here at the Van Wezel. And the musical language is not based on traditional melodic and harmonic forms. Lin-Manuel Miranda utilizes vamping in an improvisational setting and with shorter, repetitive musical gestures. So not big, long lines, and not soaring vocal lines like you will hear in Les Mis. Remember the great composer lyricist duos? We started with Gilbert Sullivan, right? Gilbert and Sullivan. Then Rodgers and Hart. How about Rodgers and Hammerstein? So we're talking lyricist and composer teams, Lerner and Lowe, Candler and Ebb. But like Stephen Sondheim, Hamilton is entirely the brainchild of one man, Lin-Manuel Miranda. He did the music and the lyrics. And, you know, when you listen to Sondheim, for instance, Send in the Clowns, and other things too, you think that really is it's a symbiotic relationship between the words and the music, because they're coming out of the same brain at the same time. So there's something to be said for both processes, but I do think it's interesting that that Hamilton and Sondheim have that sort of commonality. So Miranda and Sondheim. So finally, we're going to move to Les Miserables, which is, strictly speaking, not an American musical, right? No? But there is not a big body of work that we can call French musicals, right? Although the British have done us proud, Andrew Lloyd Webber particularly. But there's not a lot of the genre called French. So because it is so clearly an imitation of traditional American musicals, I've included Les Miserables here. It's modeled after that genre, and so, yeah, it honors it. The lyricist, Alan Bouville, got the inspiration for Les Mis in London, watching a performance of Oliver, which is a British musical. So, in closing, we have two excerpts from Les Miserables. As you listen to the first excerpt, remember that the singer, his name is Philip Quant, I think, is very, very convincing vocally, really powerful. But he's so good that you forget he's the villain in the piece. His character, Inspector Javert, has dedicated his whole life to bringing down our hero, Jean Valjean. So let's listen to the first clip. Philip Quast is his name, Philip Quast.
There, out in the darkness, a fugitive running, fallen from God, fallen from grace. God be my witness, I never shall yield till we come face to face. Till we come face to face. He knows his way in the dark. Mine is the way of the Lord. Those who follow the path of the righteous shall have their reward. And if they fall as a host of the fair, the flaming, the sword. In your multitudes, scarce to be counted, filling the darkness with order and light. You are the sentinels, silent and sure, keeping watch in the night, keeping watch in the night. You know your place in the sky. You hold your course and your aim, and each in your season returns and returns, and is always the same. And if you fall as a host of a fair, you fall in vain. And so it must be, the so it is written, on the doorway to paradise, that those who falter and those who fall must pay the price.
I listened to it 4 times. And you know, here's the difference there. You listen to what he does with one word, like the word light, how he colors each word differently. Actors do it in different ways, but the way he does it, you know, speaks to me as a singer. Kind of amazing. Okay, so before we hear the last clip, I want to share with you a quote from the San Francisco Opera website, which I think is worth mentioning here. Broadway and opera may feel like separate entities, but the connections between the two are undeniable. Both draw on a theater tradition that stretches back to ancient Greece, and both use music and performance to bring powerful stories to the stage. Opera, along with burlesque, vaudeville, and other art forms, ultimately lays the groundwork for the modern musical theater seen on Broadway today. Musicals like Into the Woods, Hamilton, or Les Miserables, and more might not exist without the performing arts culture fostered in part through opera. And now our final clip.
One day more, another day, another destiny, this never-ending road to Calvary. These men seem to know my crime will surely come a second time. One day
I
more.
did not live till today. How can I live when we are parted?
One day more.
Tomorrow you'll be worlds away. And yet with you my world has started.
One more day come on my own.
Will we ever meet again?
One more day with him not caring.
I was born to be with you.
What a life I might have known.
Inspector Jardin were standing next to each other, sharing the same microphone. Yeah, it was all just done. Yeah. So, thanks for coming. And